Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits Special Edition video. Well, I was teasing this the other day when it came to doing a video about a very specific entity found in a famous supernatural slash horror story. And a lot of you said yes to go ahead and do this entry. So the reason I was doing this was because I was recently listening to this story on my drive over to Dallas. So this was something that I read when I was much younger. It scared the living daylights out of me back then, and so I decided to revisit it on the audiobook side when I was driving over to Dallas, and it was still a pretty frightening read, so I thought it's a nice treat. I thought I would talk about this specific entity found in this story. I'm sure you've heard of it. I've heard of it now as well, and this we'll talk about all the occurrences that occurred with whatever this thing is, whether it's a ghost, whether it's a spirit, whether it's a demon as well, or something else altogether. Let's go ahead and we'll dedicate this video to it. It has to do with this. It's colloquially known as Jodie the Pig from the Amityville Horror. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating info and very frightful info, in this case associated with whatever this entity is. So what is Jodie the Pig? Well, Jodie the Pig was something that was found there within the house that ultimately became infamous because of the Amityville Horror story or novel. It's been touted, of course, as being based on a true story. Actually, in front of the novel, it says 100% true story, but some of it, or a lot of it, has been disputed in the decades after. So I'm not going to go into the full details about all that stuff, nor about the murders themselves. Some of you were asking about doing that. I might do it for Gruesome and Grotesque because, yeah, it truly was a pretty sad, unfortunate set of circumstances involving that murder, those set of murders. Instead, though, we'll focus on the entity and the specific details and the encounters that were tied to it. So, as far as what this Jodie the Pig was, it was something there that was found in the household shortly after the Lutz's family moved in. The Lutz's consisted of Mr. and Mrs. Lutz, and then the three children. I believe it was two boys and then a girl, more specifically by the name of Missy. She's the one that was frequently encountering whatever this thing was. And they were only there for a short time period. Probably about, I think the books, if I recall correctly stated, was it 22, 25, or 28 days, one of those, and so less than a full month. And yet shortly after arriving, Missy was the one that was encountering this thing. Now, whatever this thing was, this Jodie the Pig, again, it's up in the air as to what it is. Is it something involving an entity tied to that land? Is it something involving a ghost or spirit, maybe even an animal spirit? Is it altogether a demon, something that was rounded out from some very bad things happening at that location beforehand? More on that here in a minute. Whatever it was, it decided to make its appearance known to Missy shortly after they moved in. And the way she saw it, and the way everyone else first saw it, not literally, but the way they saw the circumstances, was it was just an imaginary friend to her, which is something that is common to think. Like, it makes sense because a lot of us, especially as youngsters, we all had those imaginary friends. In fact, the two other Lutz's boys also had imaginary friends. The novel went into it more in some of the earlier pages, and so it was brushed off at first. And so when she started communicating more with this imaginary friend, that's when things started to stand out. And at one point, Mrs. Lutz was asking what it was. Like, was this imaginary friend something along the lines of what you would expect? And then that's when Missy asked if she was an angel. And when Mrs. Lutz said and gave descriptions of what angels were, presumably stuff involving, wings, angelic-like appearances, that kind of stuff, that's when Missy responded and stated that no, this was actually something that resembled a pig, which naturally horrified Mrs. Lutz. It would horrify me too. Most of us, when we think of pigs, we tend to think of them as filthy, disgusting creatures. I mean, they taste really good, obviously, when it comes to the food, but otherwise they are filthy. They are clearly something that looks just horrible in most cases. And I'm sure a lot of you have pet pigs out there that are just cute, but when we think of the more traditional pigs, those are the ones that I'm thinking of, and correctly so, the movie was thinking of when it came to Missy's description. And in fact, she further stated that it was more along the lines of a giant pig, not something that was small, but something much larger. More on that here in a minute too. And the way it was described later on is that presumably it would have been colored as far as its skin, because of the way it was described in several other encounters that I'll mention here in a minute too. So in fact, you're looking at one of the drawings that Missy created of, in this case, Jodie the pig. It looks very distorted, doesn't it? Like, what are those things that are surrounding Jodie? Are those other people? Are those other entities? Why is Jodie the pig stretched out like that? I mean, this is something where if I were to hear that from a child, it would definitely give me some concern as well, because of the unusual stuff associated with it. Plus, Missy also said that she could see it as a pig. Nobody else could see it unless Jodie the pig decided that it wanted to be seen. And those made up some very memorable circumstances too. So this was a pig that could move about throughout several places in the home easily out of free will. It was mostly in Missy's room, but it was also found outside of the house. It was also found towards the boathouse, which is another prominent thing featured within the Amityville Horror novel. And then it was also found inside of some windows too. And if I'm not mistaken, there was one more area that could be debated in terms of the red room where it was found, but that's something else. That's just something that doesn't have any concrete proof as well. But yes, as far as Missy finding it and then where it's and then having conversations with it, that was her imaginary friend. It got to the troublesome point that there were very long one-sided conversations that the two of them were having. One-sided meaning that the way it was described in the novel, it was you could hear something, like in terms of Missy talking to someone, but nobody else was responding. But then Missy would talk back to whatever was being said. So clearly she was hearing it, but no one else was. And these were just entire, completely long conversations. Another eerie moment was Missy was apparently singing to this creature, whatever it was, and it presumably was singing back. And when anytime someone approached the room, then her singing would stop. And then whenever they left the room, then her singing would start. So it made it seem like it gave intelligent responses, almost like Jodie the pig was telling Missy, someone is coming, let's go ahead and let's stop when it comes to the singing. And then whenever they walked past, it would tell Missy, all right, they're gone, let's go ahead and let's start singing together as well. The only other time that stood out when it came to missed appearances happened to be the rocking chair that was found within Missy's room. Apparently it would move on its own, and at one point Mr. Lutz found the rocking chair just moving, tipping back and forth in a very eerie fashion, as you can imagine it could be, on its own within the room. Nobody else obviously tipping it, nobody else sitting on it to do so, no wind that would cause it to rock as well, and yet there it was. As far as where this Jodie the pig was found, presumably its most constant state, its location, was the boathouse. This boathouse was infamous, I was mentioning this earlier, because this was something that not only potentially housed this Jodie the pig, but it also was an infatuation of Mr. Lutz. The novel went into it multiple times where he would wake up and he would also constantly always try to check on that boathouse. Even in the dead of winter, even when the snow was out heavy out there, he would check on it for whatever reason. The dog that they had too, I believe his name was Harry, was also going crazy over the boathouse, whatever it was that was in there, which unfortunately the novel and even the movie never really explained why. This boathouse, whatever it housed, it definitely had some bad things within it. And so that's where Jodie was apparently housed, because it would presumably come out of that location and then enter Missy's room specifically through a window. And in that window, that's when it would go in and then it would come out afterward. In fact, there's a very frightful experience that'll come up here just in a minute. But yes, that one point, Minister Lutz was inspecting the boathouse yet again. That's when he turned around and he said, somewhere this was like in the middle of the night, he turned around, and to his horror, he saw actually a giant pig standing behind Missy, with those big red eyes, those beady red eyes. And so when he ran up straight up there, he saw that she was sound asleep. There was nothing there. And then that's when the rocking chair was again moving on its own. Crazy stuff. I mean, this is the frightful stuff that scared me a lot when I was a youngster and I was reading this novel for the first time. And the movie does a really good job of showcasing that scene as well. But still, when it came to those encounters, those do not add up to the most frightful encounter yet. In fact, just a quick teaser as well, there was another instance that Mrs. Lutz, where she saw those red eyes as well through a kitchen window. Unfortunately, the novel didn't go past any much further info on that, but she saw it. And then that was her experience with it, leading up to what's considered, what I think, the most frightful experience of all. Like, of all the things that happened within the house, all the different types of hauntings, all the different type of scary stuff that the family, all of them, just happened to encounter. In this case, from some lion that was a statue that bit Mr. Lutz, another one involving a marching band, another one involving some kind of image that was created onto a fireplace, and then also within that same fireplace, something reaching out, an image of some sort coming out, trying to attack him. To me, none of that stands close to what is the most frightful experience, and that involves again Jodie the pig. So within all that timeline where all these encounters are happening, we are now knee deep into the horrors of this house and whatever that was haunting the entire members of the family. They were there for some reason up in Missy's room, yet again something bad happening within it, within the room that was causing him to be there. And when they looked outside, specifically Mrs. Lutz, that's when she screamed in terror because yet again those bloody, beady red eyes, those disgusting red eyes were there. The reason why is presumed that the skin of Jodie the pig was like pitch black was because that's all they could see. They could only see the beady red eyes, but they could clearly make out that they were attached to something. But because it was very dark skinned in the middle of the night out there in the bedroom window of Missy's room, everything else was just blackness surrounding that body. So it's hard to tell, in other words, to make out what was there. Clearly, though, the bedroom window is on the second floor. There's nothing there that would allow something to be there standing or something sitting outside the window like that fashion. So something was there hovering, in other words, which just adds even more eeriness. And these beady red eyes were just staring at them right at that moment. Mrs. Lutz must have had enough because she grabbed something. I think the novel said it was like a statue or may have been a tiny little chair, something, and then she threw it straight at the window. And this is what to me is the most horrifying thing. Whatever it was that was out there in that window, well, it shattered, like the cause of that statue of that chair caused the window to shatter. And when that happened, it basically slammed against those eyes, and those eyes jumped back. But then when that happened, there was a very, very loud pig-like scream of pain, like just absolute horror. Clearly, the statue slash chair and then the shrapnel from the window, this caused pain to whatever was floating out there. It screamed and screamed exactly like you would imagine, like a pig screaming in complete horror. They heard something land hard on the ground, and then when they heard also something thump there and then squeal off into the distance. And when Mr. Lutz ran up to the window, then that's when he saw these hoof prints and what looked like the shape of a giant pig. Very hard to tell though because of again the darkness and the presumed dark skin of the darkness of the environment and then the dark skin of Jodie the pig, but he saw something disappearing into that darkness once again straight into the boathouse. I mean, that did it for me when I was younger and I was reading this information because seeing something like this out there and then more importantly hearing that horrible pig-like scream and then seeing something just squeal off into the distance, that would have caused me to move at that point. I don't care what the mortgage was. I don't care what job I had there at that location. I'm gone at that point. So who knows why they decided to stay even longer during that period. But they did, and they encountered other things afterward. So as far as explanations as to what Jodie the Pig was, it's very hard to tell. Unfortunately, or fortunately in this case for future residents, there was very little encounters afterward. None, basically. There was the only thing that happened was whatever occurred to Mr. and Mrs. Lutz. And so everything else is just pure conjecture. It's just imagining what it could be. So the most common theory is that it's a horrible entity, some kind of demon that was there within the house that could take any shape whatsoever. It happened to take the shape of a pig, in this case in front of Missy, but for others it could be something else entirely different. And so that's the most common theory. It was something like that, feeding off of the fear, creating more fear for the family, and then just enjoying all the malevolence that it was causing. That's the most common reason, and it makes more sense if you go along that route. The other theories are that it could have been actually the spirit or the ghost of either an Indian chief that was buried within that area, or a set of Indians as well buried within that location. Because apparently, and this is also still disputed, this land used to house an area where Indians were taken and they were left to die. Either they were very, very sick, almost in a sick sense, that where it's that sickness, who knows what it could have been, tuberculosis, something else, where they couldn't be within the groups anymore. And so they were left there on their own basically to die. And so their angry spirits are still there to this day. And that's the other theory, like in terms of anything related along those lines. The other idea is this: the red room, the one I was mentioning just earlier, this red room, which you're looking at pictures of here, the theory on that one, and this one is also heavily disputed, is that this was something used for satanic rituals. Whatever happened in this room, and the reason why it was blood red, it was tied to that. It was the idea that something there was happening on the satanic ritual side. There were animals that were sacrificed, and there were pigs that were sacrificed very specifically there. And so that's why there's this floating pig, there's these images of a pig, beady red eyes of a pig, because it's tied into all the pigs that were met, in this case, at the very last moment of their lives in a horrible, horrible fashion within that red room, and they haunt that location. But those are the theories as far as what's going on. Nothing else really in afterward, only because it just happened to be with the Lutz family only. But what do you guys think as far as, in this case, Jodie the Pig? The most infamous entity slash ghost slash spirit slash demon, whatever it is, from the Amityville Horror. If there's something else I might have missed, any other circumstance, anything else that stands out, please post those comments below. But to me, it is definitely one of the most scariest creatures that I have ever read within any type of novel. This stuff kept me up at night when I was reading it way back then. And nowadays, like when I was listening to the audiobook, it's not so bad and everything seems fine. But back then, oh boy, it was a different story. But if anyone else has any more thoughts on this, what was your first experience when you were first reading this novel? Let me know, please. Post those comments below. What about the movie? Did the movie do any justice associated with it? All the movies afterward too? Admittedly, I've seen only bits and parts of the famous 70s movie. I haven't seen any of the other ones, but the novel itself, that's where I have most of my experience with Jodie the Pig. But if anyone has any more thoughts on the movie sides, then please post those comments below too. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.